Welcome. In this chapter, we're going to take a look at lifespan development. So let's proceed. First of all, just as a working definition, we want to understand what developmental psychology is. And so developmental psychology is a study of how people change over the lifespan. So basically, how are they changed throughout their life? Now, we'll take a look at the various ways developmental psychologists look at this topic, but let's proceed. So, according to developmental psychologists, there are different stages of the lifespan. So we are going to take a look at that. We don't have to answer this right now. We've got a slide coming up that will answer these for you. And so some of the key themes in developmental psychology we'll take a look at as well. So first of all, developmental psychology, just as a gentle reminder, remember that's the branch of psychology. This studies how people change over the lifespan. So keep in mind, you may have remembered from Psychology 101 class that psychologists, tend to look at each topic or subject from the bio-psychosocial perspectives. And so the bio are the physical, the psychological are the cognitive perspectives, and then the social kind of goes without saying. So developmental psychologists, to keep in mind that they definitely conceptualize the lifespan of human beings, and in terms of basic stages of development. And just a quick reminder, we are going to take a look at some of those stages and who was influential in the development of those stages in just a moment. So this term right here, I just want to make you aware of, it's called critical periods, okay? Critical periods throughout the lifespan. And so that just means during which a child is maximally sensitive to environmental influences going forward. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a look at the various stages of the lifespan. So here they are, right here. They are prenatal, and that's conception to birth. Then the next stage is infancy and toddlerhood, and that's birth to 2 years old. The next stage is what's known as early childhood, between ages 2 to 6. Next stage, middle childhood, ages 6 to 12. Next stage, adolescence, between 12 and 18 years of age. Next stage, emerging adulthood. So that's ages 18 to 25 years old. So they're still not, they're kind of like, that's a kind of a phase in between adolescence and adulthood. Okay? And then young adulthood is ages 25 to 40. Middle adulthood is ages 40 through 65. Final stage of development is what's known as late adulthood, and that's 65 years to death. Now keep in mind here, I know this is a lot to try to memorize right now, but I'm just making you become acquainted with the fact that there are various stages of the lifespan. And there were certain developmental psychologists who were very influential in proposing these various stages. And we will take a look at those in a little while. Also, this is looked at more in depth in Psychology 235 class, which is called Human Growth and Development. So if you're interested in pursuing this after this course, feel free to enroll in that class. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some key themes, throughout this presentation. And so basically one key theme that we want to focus on is our genotype. And that consists of the chromosomes that we inherit from our parents. Okay? Now there's another word that's closely related, and that is phenotype. Okay? And that is the characteristics you display. So phenotype, means, basically, how tall are you? What is your body type? What is your hair color? What is your eye color? Things like that. That is what's known as phenotype. And that is the result of interaction between genetics, genetic inheritance, and environmental factors. So what's important to sort of kind of remember from here on out in the study of this topic is that there are many factors responsible for growth and development through the lifespan. It's not only genetic inheritance, but it's environmental interactions as well as social interactions. Let's proceed. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at a few questions here. Things like what are DNA? What's chromosomes? What are genes? And remember I mentioned a little bit earlier that the environment plays an important role in things in the development of the human life throughout the lifespan. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the various ways in just a moment. We're going to answer those questions. Finally, we're going to talk about what is epigenetics. And so let's go ahead and take a look at these. Let's answer these questions. So first of all, things, here's some terms that I want to make you aware of, would like for you to focus on. Things like chromosome. Those are basically long thread-like structures composed of strands of DNA. And those are found in the nucleus of our cells. Okay, and then we mentioned DNA, but what is DNA? Well, that is actually a strand, a double-stranded molecule that encodes our genetic instructions. So basically what that means is when we inherit things from our parents and previous generations, those attributes, we inherit those through genetics. And so that is the chemical basis of heredity. I hope that makes sense to you. Let's proceed. Okay, and we mentioned genes and genetics. So a gene is a unit of DNA on a chromosome. Okay? All right, so basically that's all we need to remember. Basically is genes is a unit of heredity. And the next term I want to make you aware of, that you become familiar with, is genotype. Remember, that's the genetic makeup of an individual organism. Okay, so genetic makeup. So basically, what is the what is the makeup of one's genetic inheritance? What did they inherit from previous generations and from their parents and everything? That is their genotype. So I did include this here just so you would have some visual aids. So we have within each one of us, and you've all probably heard of this term, a cell. We have many cells inside our bodies. And so within those cells, as we take a little bit more of a look into this, within a cell, right here in the middle is what's known as the nucleus, the cell nucleus. And within that nucleus, if we look over to the right in the middle here, that is where all the chromosomes are located. And then within the chromosomes, those are where genes are, okay? That's when our genetic materials are located, on the strands of the chromosome. And then if we unravel those strands, then we are able to take a look at the DNA that forms those strands within the chromosome. Now feel free, if any of this becomes a little bit rigorous and you feel you need a little more time, don't hesitate to pause the video and take notes and look at this for a little more in-depth analysis. Okay, so just as a gentle reminder here, we use the term genotype. Okay, so I put this on here a couple times because this is an important term. A genotype, remember, is our genetic inheritance. It's our makeup, genetic makeup of our each individual organism. Okay, and then the human genome, right here, this term genome, well, that's the complete set of DNA that each human being has. Okay, now, not all genes are the exact same. That's what makes each individual different from other individuals. And so those differences in the genetic materials are what's known as alleles. This term right here, alleles. Those are the different versions of genes. Okay, now one thing when it comes to talking about chromosomes, there are some types of chromosomes which are known as sex chromosomes. And those are the chromosomes that basically determine one's biological sex. Take, for instance, whether one is a male or a female or, somewhere along that spectrum. Okay? Now, those different chromosomes that determine biological sex, those are what's known as X chromosomes or Y chromosomes. And, we will take a look a little bit more in depth as we proceed here. So here's some images of chromosomes right here. And there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in most individuals, okay? Most commonly, what most commonly occurs in human beings, that they all, have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, so here are the 23 pairs right here. Okay, and then remember I mentioned, that there are two types of chromosomes known as sex chromosomes, and they are the X and the Y chromosomes. And here's just a visual image for those of you who are very interested and you learn better by visually inspecting the materials. So, a couple of definitions here I just wanted to make you acquainted with. So, genes. Okay, remember that is a unit of DNA on a chromosome. Okay, that's the basic unit of heredity. Okay, so then the types of genes that one is composed of, so to speak, that's what's called the genotype, the individual genetic makeup of each individual person or organism. Okay? Now the phenotype, remember that is what's known as the observable traits or characteristics of an organism. So basically things like, height, hair color, eye color, body shape, and, things like that. That is what's known as the phenotype. So what's important here is to take a moment and get that clear in your head. The genotype, that's the genetic makeup. But the phenotype refers to the observable traits of an individual organism. Okay, going forward. Now, different genotypes, they react differently to environmental factors. Okay, and that's actually what sculpts gene expression. Okay, that's what this term right here. So what does that mean? Well, we all have, certain types of genetic inheritance and information, genetic types of information, but we may not express, or the genes that we inherit may not express completely. And so what does that mean? Well, when one inherits certain types of genetic information, one has the capacity to express those, but one may not actually express those, and the environment can be a very influential factor in that process. So the environment can have a strong influence on whether our inherited genes express or not. So remember, expression means genes are turned on, okay? All right, so our experiences and our environment. So you remember in Psychology 101, we did talk about, remember, you probably remember me saying this so many times during our course, but remember, we psychologists, we approach everything from the bio-psycho-social perspectives. And so this is an example of how, remember, the biological can be the genetics or the genotype, okay, but then the environmental can be the social component, which will determine whether genetics actually express or they do not. And so that leads us into our next term, which is called epigenetics. And epigenetics basically is just the idea that our genes, their function can be determined by the environment. Okay, so here's a more formal definition, but I like to make things sound a little bit easier. But here's a formal definition. So it's the study of cellular mechanisms that control gene expression and of the ways that gene expression affects health and behavior. So keep in mind that when it comes to the development and growth of each individual, that is really influenced by things like, their social things that go, things that happen to them socially or environmentally throughout their lifespan. And those actually are factors that actually affect the function of their genetics. Going forward. Okay, so we're going to start going into the various phases of development. Okay, according to developmental psychologists and neurobiologists and neuroscientists, they're all interested in all of these factors. Okay, so first of all, the very first phase of development is what's called prenatal development. Okay, and prenatal obviously means when one individual starts to develop from what's known as a single-celled zygote and starts to develop into a fetus. Okay, so that phase right there is what's known as prenatal development. So I did, include some visual images here in order for you to sort of start, getting used to this, start thinking about some of these factors. So this actually, starts off as, the zygote starting to develop into a fetus. And this starts to develop, more. The fetus starts to develop more and then more into a fully formed human being, so to speak. Okay, so when we're talking about prenatal development, we want to kind of understand, what are the three stages of prenatal development? Looking at each of these images a little more in depth. And something that we're all of us psychologists and neuroscientists are interested in is, well, how does the brain develop? So how does the brain development? And then what are some of the factors that can inhibit development? And those factors are what's known as teratogens. So we will take a look at those as we proceed here. So first of all, a zygote, you remember from when one, after the sperm penetrates the ovum, that's what's known as conception, then the egg becomes fertilized and that's what's known as the zygote. Okay, then the 3 phases or stages of prenatal development are what's called the germinal period. That's the first 2 weeks after conception, the germinal period. And then weeks 3 through 8 after conception are what's known as the embryonic period. So that, embryonic, remember that's just referring to, well, the baby is now an embryo. Okay, and then 2 months all the way until birth, that's what's known as the fetal period. So the baby has become a fetus. So prenatal stage, looking at terminology and talking about that just a little more in depth together. The prenatal stage, that is the stage, before birth. Okay, and then that is the germinal, embryonic, and fetal periods. That's all prenatal stage. Okay, that's all the stages of development before birth. Okay. And we've already talked about each of these periods here, the germinal, the embryonic, and the fetal. Okay. And so we won't go into too much detail again on that. So let's proceed. Now you remember I mentioned some of the factors that can inhibit growth and development of a baby. Okay. So those are what's known as teratogens. And teratogens, those can be anything kind of harmful, like a substance, so that can be anything like environmental, that can be poisons, that can be lead, just some examples for you. So they can cause malformations or defects in an embryo or fetus. And so here's a bunch more examples right here. So feel free to pause the video and take a look at these. Okay. So things, I will kind of touch on a couple of these. So things like viruses and bacteria, well, that can definitely affect the growth and development of an embryo or fetus. Things like prescription and non-prescription drugs, addictive drugs, so what the mother may be taking as she's pregnant with the child. Okay. Things like smoking, alcohol. And this is what's surprising to most students, the mother's psychological state, her well-being, because, the psychological state, you may remember some of this from Psychology 101 class, but the psychological state of an individual, it affects one's brain and body on the hormonal levels. And so that can actually affect how a human being's biology, so to speak, everything from, the physical stature of their bodies and brains and everything, how they function. Okay, so we were talking about the development of the brain, during the prenatal phase of development. And so, I'm just giving you some examples here. You don't have to memorize all this per se. This is just something I want to kind of get you acquainted with, okay, the development. So look at some of these images here and you can see, the development of the brain. So for the first 3 weeks, it looks like this, so it's not even a fully developed brain, so to speak, but the different components are starting to develop, and then they are starting to form together into larger parts of the skull, so to speak. And so those are what's known as the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And so we don't have to be too much, concerned with memorizing all of this. So right at this moment, just trying to familiarize you with this material. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward here. So during the fetal period, we just have to keep in mind that the brain, the connections that are used throughout development, those are more strengthened. And the unused connections, well, they're eventually trimmed down. And the actual word for that is what's known as pruned. Okay? So that's elimination of the unused connection parts of the brain. Okay, the things like the neuronal pathways or the neurons. Okay, and so here are some of the things you can take a look at on your own. I'm not going to wait too much longer on this. We'll go ahead and go forward. Okay, going forward. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here, and on the second video for this chapter, we will proceed from this point on, the development during infancy and childhood. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I will see you on the next video, on the second video for this chapter.